Hello everyone, this is Reza Dorani. In today's video, I will show you how we can trigger a flow for a selected item in a SharePoint list. We will leverage one of the flow templates that triggers based on a selected item in SharePoint. The user then gets a form in a side panel that they need to fill out, in which they can dynamically define the approvers, and the flow then uses approvals and reminders and a lot more features. We will also leverage column formatting. So let's go ahead and get started with the video. But first, my introduction. To get started, I have a SharePoint list called Issue Tracker based on the Microsoft Issue Tracker list template. Now to integrate SharePoint with Power Automate in your modern SharePoint list or library experience, in the ribbon, we have the option here called Automate. And if I go to Power Automate, I have the ability here to start creating flows. If I click on Create a Flow, it will list out all the flow templates that are available that have SharePoint as a connector associated with it. Now for this demo, I will show you one template which basically provides on-demand approvals for your selected SharePoint list items. So in my case, for my issue tracker list, I will add a couple of columns, one for starting the approval process and second for tracking the response of the approval. So in my SharePoint list, I will head over right here in the header and add a column, and I will call this approval, single line of text, save. And second, I will add a multi-line of text column, call it approval commands, go to more options. I will enable enhanced rich text and I will click save. Now for my issue tracker list, I have a status column that tracks the status of the issue. And as part of this column, I have multiple choices. Now, once the approval process is complete, if the approvers have approved the request, I will set the status of my issue to closed. And if the approvers have rejected the request, the status would be rejected. Now, to start a flow on demand based on the SharePoint list item selection, I will head over to Automate and go to Power Automate and click Create a Flow. And this lists out all the templates. Now I can directly go to flow.microsoft.com or click right here and go and see all my flows and start creating flows from scratch, which have triggers associated with SharePoint. But for this demo, I will leverage a very useful template that's already available and can be customized further to meet your solution needs. The template I will select is request approval everyone must approve for a selected item. Now the moment I select that template, I will be taken to flow.microsoft.com, and this template has three connectors: approvals for the approval scenario, Outlook for sending emails, and of course SharePoint because this flow is connected with that SharePoint list. So once I have my connection set, I will click on Create Flow. And this now will build the flow based on the provided template, which can be customized based on your needs. Now, if I go to Edit, this is the flow that was built based on the template. Now let's try and understand this flow. The flow gets triggered for a selected item in my issue tracking SharePoint list. And when this flow triggers, the user will be provided with a form, and that form has the following fields. Request, which is a text field, wherein the user can enter a message that they would like to send to the approvers. We have an email type field for approvers, wherein the user can select multiple approvers. Next is a Boolean column called approval reminders. So would you like to remind your approvers if they have not responded to the approval action? If you turn this on, you also have additional options here to define what's the duration of your reminder, weekly, daily, hourly, and then what that duration is. For example, send it every week, send it every day, or send it every 4 hours, whatever your use case is. So this is completely configurable. So the user can define the settings when they are calling this flow. Once the flow is triggered, the next step is to get the details of the item. The flow has certain variables here to maintain details about the approval response, who the approvers are, the link to the approval action, and then begins the main approval action, which is create an approval. So it will create an approval and it will pass these details. All of this is customizable. After the approval action, there is the wait for an approval action. So basically the flow will wait for the approvers to respond. And while this wait is being executed, in parallel, there is a branch right here which executes the reminder process, which basically sends approval reminders to the approvers if they have not responded to the approval action based on the duration specified. Once the approval action is responded to, there are additional steps here to generate an HTML table of the responses of the approver, who the approver is, what is their response, what comments have they put in. And after that, there is a condition here to check the outcome of the approval. If the outcome is rejected, an email goes out to the individual who started the flow that the item has been rejected. If it is approved, an email goes out that the item is approved. In my case, I would also like to change the status of my item. I will add an action, and the action is the update item action in SharePoint. So I will update the item. I will pick my SharePoint site where I have my issue tracking list. I will pick my issue tracker list. I need to define the ID of the item that I would like to update. So I'll go to the dynamic content, pick the ID of the item from the get item action. Any mandatory fields that are associated with your list, you will have to fill them again. So for the title, I will search for the dynamic value title and again pick it from the get item action. And for the status choice column in my SharePoint list, I will change the status to closed. I also created that approval comments column. So right here is where I will embed that HTML table that is already generated as part of this flow. So here's that action that says create HTML table. So in the approval comments section, I will head over to dynamic content and pick the output of the create HTML table action. So once I've completed this, on the approved side of the branch, I will head over and copy this action and paste the action on the rejected side of the branch as well, and make a modification to the status. In case of rejection, I will change the status to rejected. Once I've completed this, I will go ahead and save my flow. I will also recommend you to change the name of the flow. That's because whatever is the name of the flow, that will show up in your SharePoint list. So if I head back to my issue tracking list now, and if I select a specific record, head over to automate, you will see that I have the option here to start that flow because the flow is connected now to the SharePoint list. And here is that exact name of the flow. So let me go back and rename this flow to, I'll call this my request approval flow and click save. Now if I head back to my SharePoint list and select an item, head over to automate, I will see my updated name of my flow right here. So here's request approval. And if I select this, this will now launch the side panel in the context of SharePoint. And for the first time, it will ask the user to ensure that all the connections are in place. So I'll click continue. And this now opens up the form that was set in the trigger action of the flow. So here is the request message for my approvers. I will say please approve. And right here, I can pick my approvers. So let's say I just pick Sarah as an approver for this use case. I can add additional approvers if required. I can even turn on approval reminders here, define the approval duration, and then enter the number for the duration reminder. All those features are inbuilt as part of this template. I'll keep it simple for now and just go ahead and run the flow. And once this flow gets triggered, Sarah gets an email that's an approval email associated with that item in my SharePoint list. And here's a link directly to that item. So if Sarah clicks on the link, this will directly open that list item for which I started the approval process. And right here in the email itself, Sarah can respond to the approval action. So Sarah can either approve the request or reject the request. And when the selection is made, Sarah can also enter the comments. I've entered comments and I'll click on submit. And once I click on submit, the approval response will be recorded. The person who initiated the approval process, that was Reza. So here is the email that Reza receives that says your request for your issue tracker item. Here's the title of that item has been approved. Here are the details of the approval process. Sarah as the approver said it looks good and the response of the approval was approved. If I head back to my SharePoint list, here is my list item. The status has changed to closed because in the flow, I added that action to change the status. And here are the approval commands, which includes the name of the approver, the comment the approver put in, as well as the response of the approval. Now for this item, if I look at this multi-line text field, which I added as rich text, if I go to edit source, you see I get this table data that the flow was generating for me. But what I'm missing here is a little bit of styling to my table. So for example, if I just add border equal to 1 to my HTML table here and click OK, I get this border around my table. And now if I look at my issue tracking list, I can see that HTML formatted table right here. So in order for me to add that border, I just need to add one simple expression in my flow. So I'll head back to my flow, and for the approval commands, wherein I'm putting directly the response of the HTML table action, this time I will head over to expressions and add a very simple expression called replace. The first parameter, I will pick the output of the create HTML table action. And in this, I will replace the table tag. And I would like to replace this with table where the border is equal to 1. So all I'm doing right here is basically just replacing table with table border equal to 1. Once I've completed this expression, I will ensure I do the same thing on the other side of the branch as well. Once I've made my modifications, I will save my flow. Now let's pick a different item and let's go ahead and start the flow again. So I'll put in some commands for my approvers. This time I will pick a couple of approvers, Sarah and James. Every approver must approve for this process to be completely approved. If even one approver rejects it, it will stand as rejected. Go ahead and run the flow. So now Sarah and James both will receive approval notifications. So here's the notification for Sarah. Sarah can either approve or reject this. Let's say Sarah goes and says, okay, this looks good, and approves it. Whereas on the other side, James goes ahead and rejects this request. Puts in some commands, clicks submit. And now Reza, who started the flow, gets an email notification that your request for the issue tracker item has been rejected, and here are the complete details of the approval process. Sarah said approved, here are the commands. James said reject, here are the commands. And if I head back to my SharePoint list now, you will see that this item has the status as rejected. If I select this item and if I look at the approval commands, multi-line text, rich text field, I can see now the border being applied because of that expression I put in. And I can also see the entire approval process right here in this column. Now I created a column called approval as well. And the reason why I created this column is because I do not want the user to select an item, go to automate, then select the flow. It's like 2 or 3 clicks to get there. Or the user can select an item, head over to 3 ellipses, go to automate, and then select the flow. What we will do for this column is we will add column formatting, wherein we will add a link so the user can click on the link and directly start the approval process. If I look at the documentation for column formatting, there is an example available for creating a button to launch a flow. And here is the example JSON that has been provided. So I will just go ahead and copy this, head back to my SharePoint list, go to approval, go to column settings, and go to format this column. Right here under format columns, at the bottom there is an option called advanced mode. I will select this. I will replace this code with the code that I copied earlier. And in this, we need to make one important change. There's an action here called execute flow, wherein it has the ID of the flow. Now for the flow that we created, right here on the top in the URL, here at the end is the ID, the GUID of that flow. So I can go ahead and copy this, head back to my issue tracker list and replace this GUID with the GUID of my flow. And then I can click save. Now if we look at the approval column, I see this option here that says send to manager. And that's because at the bottom of this JSON, there is a text that says send to manager. We can change this. So in our case, I want to start the approval process. So I will change the text to start approval and click save. Now if we look right here, for this column, I have the option now to directly start the approval. So let's say I would like to start the approval process for this item. I can just click on this and directly now it will launch that side panel for me to go ahead and start the flow. And we can add some conditional logic here to show this link or hide this link depending upon statuses. So for example, once again, if I go to this column and go to format, for the text content that says start approval, if the approval is rejected, then I would like this button to say restart the approval because the decision has already been made, it's rejected. But I would like to give the user an option to restart the approval. So for that, we can add simple formatting functions like if the status is equal to rejected, in that case, put the text restart approval, else put the text start approval. And once I have this complete, I will click on save. And this time, if you look at the status, I have one item that is rejected. So in that case, the approval button says restart approval. For the other ones, it says start approval. Let's take another example. Maybe I would like to only show this button when the status is not closed. So for that, right here in the style property, I have added an additional property called display. And again, I'm making a conditional check. If the status is closed, then set the display to none. Otherwise, set the display to display. Now, if I save this, you will see that for the status closed, I don't even get the start and approval action. So you can add conditional scenarios here depending upon your use case. Now, if I sign into the list with a user who is not the creator of the flow, in this case, Sarah, and let's say Sarah wants to start the approval process for this item. If Sarah clicks on this start an approval button, the side panel does not launch. If Sarah selects the record, goes to automate, Sarah does not even see that option here. So currently, the flow is only visible to the user who created this flow. And the reason is because if I head over to the flow details page, I can see that Reza is the creator or the owner of this flow. But I need to give other users access to run this flow. So there is a setting here called run only users. Head over to edit. And here is where you can define who are those users who can run the flow. Now in my case, it's a SharePoint list. So the security should be based on the security of the SharePoint list. Whoever has access to it should be able to run this. So for that, I can head over to the SharePoint tab, pick my SharePoint site, pick my list, and click add. And just like that, I have now granted access to the users of that SharePoint list who have access to it to have the ability now to run this flow. And when this flow runs, I would like all the connections in this flow to run under that user's account. Now, once I'm done with this, I'll click save. And now logged in as Sarah in my SharePoint list. This time, if Sarah selects this button, it will go ahead and launch the flow panel because Sarah has the access now to run this flow. And for the first time, Sarah will have to confirm to the connections, click continue, and Sarah can now go ahead and start the approval process. Sarah picks Reza as an approver, runs the flow. Now the flow will get triggered from Sarah's account, send an approval action to Reza. Here is the approval action for Reza. Reza gets the link to that same item that Sarah started the approval process for. Reza can provide the approval response. Put in comments, click submit, and the approval response will be recorded. Sarah gets an email with the response of the approval because Sarah was the person who started the flow. Here are all the details of the approval. The status is now approved. And if Sarah gets back to that SharePoint list item, the status for that is now changed to closed. And here are all the details of the approval. If you enjoyed this video, then do like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so that whenever I post my latest video, you get notified about it. Thank you so much for watching.